Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest waves. Sometimes a single tattoo tells a story that moves mountains. And sometimes, when you think the world has forgotten your sacrifices, a stranger appears who reminds you that heroes are never truly forgotten. Sarah Mitchell thought she was just another passenger on Flight 447 to Denver. She had no idea that her journey would become a viral sensation, touching millions of hearts and reminding us all that respect and gratitude still exist in our world. This is her story, a story about service, sacrifice, and the unexpected moment when the universe decided to say thank you in the most beautiful way possible. Sarah Mitchell stood in the long security line at Chicago O'Hare International Airport, checking her watch for the third time in 5 minutes. The morning sun streamed through the massive windows, casting long shadows across the crowded terminal. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, feeling the familiar ache in her left leg, a reminder of her last deployment that would probably never fully go away. The airport buzzed with the usual chaos of early morning travelers. Business people rushed past with their rolling suitcases, families corralled excited children, and tired-looking passengers clutched coffee cups like lifelines. Sarah observed it all with the trained eye of someone who had spent years watching, waiting, and protecting others in far more dangerous places than this. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through her messages. Her sister Jessica had sent another text asking if she was sure about the move to Denver. Her mom had forwarded an article about job opportunities for veterans. Her former teammate Mike had shared a meme about adjusting to civilian life. Everyone meant well, but sometimes their constant check-ins reminded her of just how much her life had changed in the past year. Sarah had served 8 years as a Navy SEAL, one of the few women to complete the grueling training and serve in active combat operations. She had conducted missions in places most people couldn't pronounce, saved lives under impossible circumstances, and earned decorations that now sat in a box in her small apartment. But all of that felt like a different lifetime now. The medical discharge had been the hardest pill to swallow. Not because of the injury itself. She had accepted that risk the moment she raised her right hand and took the oath. It was the sudden transition from a world where every day mattered, where her skills made a difference, to this civilian life where she felt invisible and often useless. Moving through security, Sarah caught her reflection in the polished metal of the scanner. She looked different now. Her hair had grown out from the military regulation cut, now falling in soft waves past her shoulders. The desert tan had faded to a normal complexion. She wore civilian clothes, jeans, a comfortable sweater, and boots that looked fashionable rather than tactical. To anyone looking at her, she appeared to be just another 28-year-old woman traveling for business or pleasure. The only visible reminder of her military service was the small tattoo on her right wrist, the SEAL Trident, also known as the Budweiser. She usually kept it covered with long sleeves or a watch, not because she was ashamed of it, but because it invited questions she wasn't always ready to answer. Today, however, the sweater sleeves had pushed up slightly, revealing the distinctive golden eagle, anchor, trident, and pistol that marked her as a member of one of the world's most elite military units. After clearing security, Sarah made her way to Gate B-17. Her flight to Denver was scheduled to depart in 45 minutes. This trip marked a new beginning, a job interview with a security consulting firm that specialized in working with government contractors. It wasn't the adrenaline-pumping life she had known, but it was a chance to use her skills in a meaningful way. She found a seat near the gate and pulled out her tablet to review her notes one more time. The job seemed promising. The company valued military experience and had specifically sought out candidates with her background. The salary would allow her to rent a small apartment in a decent neighborhood and maybe even save a little money for the first time in years. As boarding time approached, Sarah gathered her belongings and joined the line. She had splurged on a first-class ticket, her first time flying anything other than military transport or economy class. The extra money had hurt her tight budget, but she figured arriving relaxed and comfortable for such an important interview was worth the investment. When she reached the gate agent, Sarah handed over her boarding pass with a smile. The young man scanned it, frowned slightly, and scanned again. He looked at his computer screen, then back at Sarah. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but there seems to be an issue with your seat assignment," he said, his voice taking on that practiced apologetic tone that airline employees perfected. Sarah's stomach dropped. "What kind of issue?" "Well, it looks like your first-class seat has been reassigned. There was an overbooking situation, and unfortunately, passengers with certain ticket types are subject to involuntary changes." "I don't understand. I bought this ticket 3 weeks ago. I specifically paid for first class because I have an important meeting when I land." The gate agent's expression remained professionally sympathetic, but unmoved. "I completely understand your frustration, ma'am. We do have you confirmed in seat 23B, which is an aisle seat in our main cabin. And we'd like to offer you a $50 travel voucher for the inconvenience." Sarah looked over his shoulder at the jet bridge, where she could see well-dressed passengers leisurely making their way onto the plane. She thought about the extra $400 she had spent on the upgrade, money she really couldn't afford to lose. She thought about the cramped middle seat that would aggravate her leg injury. Most of all, she thought about how this small indignity felt like just another reminder that she didn't quite fit anywhere in the civilian world. "Is there anything else you can do?" she asked, keeping her voice calm despite the frustration building inside her. "I'm really sorry, but that's the best I can offer today. The main cabin is very comfortable, and you'll still arrive at the same time as the first-class passengers." Sarah took a deep breath and accepted the new boarding pass. There was no point in arguing further. She had learned in the military that sometimes you had to roll with changes beyond your control, adapt, and complete the mission regardless of the obstacles. As she walked down the jet bridge, Sarah tried to shake off the disappointment. So what if she had a sitting coach? The flight was only 2.5 hours. She could handle much worse than a cramped airplane seat. She had slept in foxholes, stayed awake for 3 days straight during operations, and endured training that broke grown men. A commercial flight in economy class was nothing. Still, as she passed through the first-class cabin and saw the spacious seats with their extra legroom and amenities, she couldn't help but feel a pang of regret. One passenger was already enjoying a glass of champagne while reading a newspaper. Another had spread out documents across her tray table and was working comfortably on a laptop. This was what Sarah had planned for, a chance to arrive at her destination refreshed and ready to make a good impression. Instead, she continued toward the back of the plane, wheeling her carry-on behind her and looking for row 23. The main cabin was already crowded with passengers stowing bags and settling into their seats. Sarah found her row and discovered that the middle seat between a large man reading a financial magazine and a woman with a crying baby was indeed hers. She squeezed past the man, who barely looked up from his reading, and settled into the narrow seat. The woman with the baby offered an apologetic smile as the infant continued to fuss. Sarah smiled back genuinely. She didn't mind crying babies. After the sounds of combat, a crying child was actually rather comforting, a reminder of innocence and new life. As she buckled her seatbelt and adjusted her position to accommodate her injured leg, Sarah reflected on how different this felt from military flights. On those aircraft, everyone understood the mission. Everyone had earned their place through service and sacrifice, and there was a shared sense of purpose that transcended individual comfort. Here, she was just another passenger who had been bumped from first class, probably seen as someone who couldn't really afford the upgrade in the first place, and was therefore expendable when the airline needed to make adjustments. The irony wasn't lost on her that she had spent years defending the freedoms that allowed people to live comfortable lives, yet now she was the one being treated as if her comfort and dignity didn't matter. The flight attendants made their safety announcements, and Sarah noticed one of them glance in her direction several times. She wondered if word had spread about the passenger who had been downgraded, marking her as a potential problem. She made sure to keep her expression pleasant and cooperative, The last thing she wanted was to be labeled as difficult. As the plane pushed back from the gate and began its taxi to the runway, Sarah closed her eyes and tried to focus on the positive aspects of her situation. She was healthy. She had survived her military service with most of her body and mind intact, and she had a promising job opportunity waiting for her in Denver. A cramped airplane seat was a minor inconvenience in the grand scheme of things. But as the plane lifted off and Chicago fell away below them, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this flight was somehow symbolic of her larger struggle to find her place in civilian life. She had given years of her life in service to her country, had sacrificed her body and peace of mind for the security of others, and now she often felt like she was fighting for scraps of respect and recognition in a world that had moved on without her. She pulled down her sleeves, covering the seal tattoo that marked her as someone extraordinary, and settled in for what she expected would be a long and uncomfortable flight to her uncertain future. 30 minutes into the flight, Sarah had managed to find a somewhat comfortable position despite the cramped quarters. The businessman to her left had fallen asleep, his magazine sliding toward her seat. The woman with the baby had successfully soothed her child, who now dozed peacefully in her arms. For a moment, Sarah allowed herself to relax and watched the landscape passing below through the small window. The flight attendants had begun their beverage service, and Sarah could hear the soft clink of glasses and murmured conversations from the first-class cabin ahead. She tried not to think about the champagne and warm nuts she was missing, focusing instead on her interview preparations. She had researched the company thoroughly, practiced her responses to common questions, and prepared thoughtful questions of her own about the role and company culture. "Excuse me, miss?" Sarah looked up to find a flight attendant standing beside her row. It was the same one who had been glancing in her direction earlier, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a professional smile. "Yes, I'm sorry to bother you, but Captain Reynolds would like to speak with you. Would you mind coming forward for just a moment?" Sarah felt a flutter of anxiety. Had she done something wrong? Was there an issue with her ticket or identification? She had heard stories of passengers being removed from flights for the smallest infractions, and she couldn't afford any complications that might jeopardize her interview. "Is everything okay?" she asked quietly, not wanting to disturb the sleeping passengers around her. "Oh yes, absolutely. The captain just wanted to have a quick word. It won't take long." Sarah unbuckled her seatbelt and carefully made her way past her seatmates, following the flight attendant toward the front of the plane. As they walked, she noticed other passengers looking up curiously. She felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment, wondering what could possibly require the captain's attention. They passed through the first-class cabin, where Sarah tried not to make eye contact with the passengers enjoying their spacious seats and complimentary beverages. At the very front of the aircraft, the flight attendant knocked gently on the cockpit door and spoke quietly into her headset. A moment later, the door opened, and a tall man in his 50s stepped out. Captain Reynolds wore the crisp uniform and confident bearing that marked him as a veteran pilot. His gray hair was perfectly groomed, and his kind eyes crinkled at the corners in a way that suggested he smiled often. "You must be Sarah," he said, extending his hand with a warm smile. "Thank you for coming forward. I hope I'm not interrupting your flight." Sarah shook his hand, still confused about why she had been summoned. "Not at all, sir. Though I have to admit, I'm not sure why you wanted to see me." Captain Reynolds glanced down at her wrist, where her sleeve had pulled back slightly to reveal the seal trident tattoo. His expression grew more serious, though his smile remained. "I couldn't help but notice your ink when you boarded. That's a trident, isn't it?" Sarah looked down at her wrist, surprised that he had spotted the tattoo from a distance. She nodded slowly. "Yes, sir, it is. How long did you serve?" 8 years, sir. I was medically discharged last year." Captain Reynolds' expression softened with what Sarah recognized as genuine respect and understanding. "Navy SEAL. That's no small accomplishment, especially for a woman. You should be proud of that service." "Thank you, sir. I am." Sarah felt a familiar mix of pride and sadness when discussing her military career. She was proud of what she had accomplished, but the end of her service still felt raw. "I served 22 years in the Air Force before I started flying commercial," Captain Reynolds said. "I know what it's like to transition to civilian life. It's not always easy, is it?" Sarah was surprised by his openness and insight. "No, sir, it's not. But I'm managing." Captain Reynolds nodded thoughtfully. "I heard about the situation with your seat assignment. That must have been frustrating." Sarah's embarrassment deepened. So that was why she had been called forward. The captain had heard about her being bumped from first class and probably felt sorry for her. "It's really not a big deal, sir. These things happen. Maybe not to you, but it is to me." Captain Reynolds looked past Sarah toward the first-class cabin, then back at her. "I've been flying for over 30 years, and I've learned that sometimes the people who deserve the most comfort and respect are the ones least likely to demand it." Before Sarah could respond, Captain Reynolds turned to the flight attendant who had brought her forward. "Jennifer, I'd like to make a change to our seating arrangements." "Of course, Captain. What would you like me to do?" "I want you to move Sarah to seat 2A. The passenger currently in that seat can have her original economy seat." Sarah's eyes widened. "Sir, that's really not necessary. I'm perfectly fine where I am." "With respect, Sarah, I disagree." Captain Reynolds' voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to making decisions quickly and sticking to them. "You've served this country with honor and distinction. The least we can do is make sure you're comfortable on this flight." Jennifer nodded and made a note on her tablet. "I'll take care of that right away, Captain." "Wait," Sarah said, feeling overwhelmed by the unexpected kindness. "I can't let you do this. Someone else paid for that seat." Captain Reynolds chuckled. "Actually, as captain of this aircraft, I have what you might call executive authority over seating arrangements when safety or special circumstances require it. And I consider honoring a Navy SEAL service to be a special circumstance." Sarah felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. It had been a long time since anyone had recognized her service in such a meaningful way. In the years since her discharge, she had grown accustomed to being invisible, just another veteran trying to find her place in civilian society. "Sir, I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything. Just enjoy the flight." "And Sarah?" Captain Reynolds waited until she met his eyes. "Thank you for your service. What you did matters, even if people don't always remember to say so." Jennifer touched Sarah's arm gently. "If you'll come with me, I'll get you settled in your new seat." As they walked back toward the first-class cabin, Sarah felt as if she were in a dream. Other passengers looked up curiously as she passed, probably wondering why someone from economy was being escorted to the premium section. She caught a few disapproving glances, as if some passengers thought she didn't belong in first class. If only they knew, Sarah thought. If only they knew what she had sacrificed, what she had given up, what she had endured in service to the very freedoms that allowed them to travel safely and complain about airline food and flight delays. Jennifer stopped at row 2, where a middle-aged businessman in an expensive suit was working on his laptop. He looked up with annoyance when Jennifer approached. "Excuse me, sir, but we need to move you to a different seat." The man's expression darkened. "I beg your pardon? I specifically requested this seat. I'm a platinum member with this airline. I understand, and we apologize for the inconvenience. We have an excellent seat available in our main cabin, and we'd be happy to provide compensation for the change. This is ridiculous. I paid for first class, and I expect to receive first-class service. Who authorized this change?" "The captain, sir. We'll make sure you're comfortable and well taken care of in your new seat." The businessman looked at Sarah with obvious irritation, as if she were personally responsible for his displacement. He gathered his belongings with exaggerated frustration, muttering under his breath about declining service standards and poor customer treatment. Sarah felt a wave of guilt wash over her. This man had paid for his seat just as she had paid for hers. The difference was that his hadn't been taken away at the gate. But now, thanks to Captain Reynolds' kindness, this passenger was experiencing the same frustration she had felt earlier. "Sir," Sarah said quietly as the man prepared to leave, "I'm sorry about this. If you want to keep your seat, I can go back to coach." It's really not a problem. The businessman paused and looked at her more carefully, perhaps hearing the sincerity in her voice. His expression softened slightly, though he still appeared frustrated. "It's not your fault," he said with a sigh. "I just hate last-minute changes." "I understand. I really do." Jennifer stepped in smoothly. "Sir, we have a lovely aisle seat in row 12, and I'll personally make sure you receive complimentary beverages and priority service for the remainder of the flight." The businessman nodded reluctantly and gathered his things. As he passed Sarah, he paused again. "I hope you enjoy the seat," he said, and there was no sarcasm in his voice. After he left, Jennifer helped Sarah settle into seat 2A. The difference was immediately apparent. The seat was easily twice as wide as her economy seat, with ample legroom that allowed her to stretch out her injured leg comfortably. There was a personal entertainment screen, a power outlet, and enough space to actually work or relax during the flight. "Can I get you anything to drink?" Jennifer asked. "Champagne, perhaps? Or maybe some orange juice." "Orange juice would be wonderful. Thank you." As Jennifer left to prepare her drink, Sarah sank back into the plush seat and tried to process what had just happened. In the span of 10 minutes, her entire flight experience had been transformed. More importantly, she had been reminded that there were still people in the world who valued service and sacrifice, who understood that respect and gratitude weren't just empty words but principles worth acting upon. She looked around at her fellow first-class passengers, most of whom had returned to their newspapers, laptops, and conversations. They probably assumed she was just another business traveler or someone who had paid for the premium experience. They had no idea about the journey that had brought her to this seat or the recognition that had made it possible. Jennifer returned with her orange juice and a small plate of warm nuts. "These are compliments of Captain Reynolds," she said with a smile. "He wanted to make sure you were properly welcomed aboard. Please tell him thank you again for me." "Of course." "And Sarah? For what it's worth, I think what you did was incredible. My son is thinking about military service, and people like you make me proud that he's considering it." After Jennifer left, Sarah sat quietly with her orange juice and allowed herself to feel something she hadn't experienced in a long time: valued. Not just tolerated or pitied, but genuinely valued for who she was and what she had contributed. She thought about all the times over the past year when she had felt invisible or forgotten, when civilians had seemed oblivious to the sacrifices made by service members, when she had wondered if her years of dedication had meant anything at all. This simple act of kindness from Captain Reynolds was a powerful reminder that her service mattered, that there were people who understood and appreciated the price of freedom. As the plane continued its journey toward Denver, Sarah finally began to relax. She had a comfortable seat, a friendly crew, and a renewed sense of hope about her future. Maybe civilian life wouldn't be so difficult after all. Maybe there were more people like Captain Reynolds out there. People who remembered, people who cared, people who were willing to act on their gratitude, rather than just offering empty thanks. She touched her wrist where the seal, trident, lay hidden beneath her sleeve. For the first time in months, she felt genuinely proud to carry that mark of service. As the flight settled into its cruising altitude, Sarah found herself genuinely relaxed for the first time in weeks. The spacious first-class seat allowed her to stretch her legs fully, relieving the constant ache that had become her unwelcome companion since the injury. She had accepted a second glass of orange juice and was browsing through the complimentary magazine selection when she became aware of someone watching her. The woman across the aisle, seated in 2B, had been glancing in her direction several times. She appeared to be in her early 60s, with silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun and wearing what Sarah recognized as expensive but understated clothing. When their eyes met, the woman smiled warmly. "I hope you don't mind me asking," the woman said quietly, "but I couldn't help but notice what happened earlier. Jennifer mentioned something about military service." Sarah felt her cheeks warm slightly. She wasn't used to discussing her background with strangers, especially in such a public setting. "Yes, ma'am. I served in the Navy. My late husband was Air Force," the woman said, her voice carrying a note of pride mixed with sadness. 26 years. You would have appreciated what Captain Reynolds did for you. I'm sorry for your loss, Sarah said sincerely. 26 years is quite a commitment. Thank you. He always said that military families serve too, but I know it was nothing compared to what you all go through. The woman paused, seeming to consider her next words carefully. Jennifer mentioned you were a SEAL. That must have been incredibly challenging. Sarah nodded, unsure how much to share with this kind stranger. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, but also the most rewarding. I imagine so. I'm Margaret, by the way. Margaret Chun. Sarah Mitchell. It's nice to meet you, ma'am. Please, call me Margaret. And I hope this isn't too forward, but I'm curious about your story. You seem quite young to be transitioning to civilian life. There was something in Margaret's manner, a genuine interest combined with respectful discretion, that put Sarah at ease. Perhaps it was her connection to military life through her husband, or maybe it was simply the universal language of loss and transition that both women seemed to understand. I was medically discharged, Sarah said simply. Took some shrapnel in my leg during my last deployment. Nothing life-threatening, but enough to end my career. Margaret's expression grew more compassionate. That must have been devastating. It was in a lot of ways. The military was my life for 8 years. It's not easy figuring out what comes next. What are you doing now? If you don't mind me asking. I'm actually flying to Denver for a job interview. Security consulting with a firm that works with government contractors. It's not exactly the same as active duty, but at least I'd be using some of my skills. Margaret smiled. That sounds promising, and certainly more exciting than my reason for traveling. I'm visiting my daughter and her new baby. Your first grandchild? Third, actually, but the first one I'll get to meet right after birth. My daughter lives in Denver, and she just had a little girl 2 weeks ago. I would have flown out sooner, but I was finishing up some business commitments. What kind of work do you do? Sarah asked, finding herself genuinely interested in this woman's story. I run a nonprofit organization that helps veterans transition to civilian careers, Margaret said, and Sarah's surprise must have shown on her face. That's why I was so interested in your story. We work with service members in situations very similar to yours. Sarah felt a chill of recognition. What's the name of your organization? Bridges to Tomorrow. We specialize in matching military skills with civilian opportunities, particularly in technology and security fields. Sarah's eyes widened. I've heard of your organization. My transition counselor mentioned it, but said the waiting list was too long. Unfortunately, that's true. We're a small organization with limited resources, but we try to help as many people as we can. The need is so much greater than what we can provide. Margaret paused, studying Sarah's face. Tell me more about your background. What was your specialty in the SEAL teams? Sarah found herself opening up in a way she rarely did with strangers. Perhaps it was the comfortable environment or Margaret's obvious understanding of military culture, but she began to share details about her service that she usually kept private. She talked about her role in intelligence gathering and electronic warfare, her deployments to Afghanistan and Iraq, and the mission that had ended her career. She described the frustration of medical appointments and disability evaluations, the challenge of translating military experience into civilian job qualifications, and the loneliness of being disconnected from the brotherhood she had known for so many years. Margaret listened with the focused attention of someone who had heard similar stories many times before, but who still found each one personally meaningful. She asked thoughtful questions and shared insights from her years of working with veterans, always with respect for Sarah's privacy and dignity. You mentioned electronic warfare, Margaret said at one point. That's a skill set that translates very well to cybersecurity roles. Have you considered that field? Honestly, I haven't thought much about it. Most of the cybersecurity positions I've seen require specific certifications that I don't have. That's exactly the kind of barrier our organization helps people overcome. We have partnerships with training programs and companies that understand the value of military experience, even without traditional credentials. Sarah felt a spark of interest. How does that work? Well, we match veterans with mentors who work in their field of interest. The mentors provide guidance on career paths, help with resume translation, and often make direct introductions to employers. We also provide funding for certification programs when needed. That sounds amazing, but like you said, there's a waiting list. Margaret was quiet for a moment, looking thoughtful. Tell me about this interview in Denver. What company are you meeting with? Blackstone Security Solutions. They specialize in providing security services for government contractors and corporate clients. I know Blackstone, Margaret said with a smile. In fact, their CEO, David Richardson, serves on our board of directors. He's a former Marine who started the company specifically to employ veterans. Sarah's heart began to beat faster. Really? Really? And if I remember correctly, they've been looking for someone with exactly your background to head up their new cybersecurity division. The position has been open for months because they haven't found the right candidate. I thought I was interviewing for a general security consultant position. You might be, but I suspect David is thinking bigger than that. He tends to hire people for their potential rather than just their immediate qualifications. The conversation was interrupted by Jennifer, who stopped by their row with a fresh selection of beverages and snacks. As she served them, she glanced between Sarah and Margaret with a curious expression. You two seem to be having quite an intense conversation, Jennifer observed with a friendly smile. Just getting acquainted, Margaret replied. Sarah here is exactly the kind of person my organization exists to help. Jennifer looked interested. What kind of organization? We help veterans transition to civilian careers. Sarah is a former Navy SEAL who's looking for new opportunities. Jennifer's eyes widened with respect and interest. Wow, that's incredible. You know, my nephew is in the Navy. He's always talking about wanting to be a SEAL, but I had no idea women could do that. It's not easy, Sarah said, but it's possible. The training is the same regardless of gender. That's so inspiring, Jennifer said. I'll have to tell him that I met you. He'd be thrilled to know that his dream is achievable. After Jennifer left, Margaret turned back to Sarah with a thoughtful expression. You know, I've been thinking about your situation, and I have an idea. It's a bit unconventional, but it might be exactly what you need. I'm listening. Instead of just going to this interview blind, what if you had some inside information about what David is really looking for? And what if you went in with a preliminary proposal for developing their cybersecurity capabilities? Sarah felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. That sounds great in theory, but I don't have that kind of information or background. But I do, Margaret said with a confident smile. I've known David for 3 years. I understand his business model, his challenges, and his goals. More importantly, I know exactly what kind of person he values and how to present your experience in a way that highlights your unique strengths. You would help me with that? Not just help you. I'd like to offer you a spot in our program, effective immediately. No waiting list, no lengthy application process. You're exactly the kind of veteran we exist to serve. Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes. Margaret, I don't know what to say. This is incredibly generous, but we just met. You don't really know me or what I'm capable of. Sarah, I've been doing this work for 8 years. I've learned to recognize potential when I see it. More importantly, I've learned to trust my instincts about character. You have both the skills and the integrity that companies like Blackstone desperately need. Margaret reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. Here's my direct number. As soon as we land, I'm going to call David and tell him that he needs to make time to really talk with you, not just conduct a standard interview. What if I don't get the job? Then we'll find you something better. But, Sarah, I have a feeling that by tomorrow afternoon, you're going to have more opportunities than you know what to do with. As the plane began its descent toward Denver, Sarah looked out the window at the Rocky Mountains rising majestically in the distance. When she had boarded this flight in Chicago, she had been facing an uncertain future with limited options and modest expectations. Now, thanks to a captain who recognized her service and a fellow passenger who understood her potential, she was approaching a new city with genuine hope and exciting possibilities. She thought about the businessman who had been moved from his seat to make room for her. His inconvenience had led to this life-changing conversation with Margaret. Sometimes, Sarah reflected, the universe worked in mysterious but wonderful ways. Margaret was busy typing notes in her phone, apparently sending messages to various contacts in Denver. "I'm setting up a few additional meetings for you," she explained. "David Richardson isn't the only person who needs to meet you. I want you to have multiple options so you can choose the opportunity that's the best fit." Sarah watched this remarkable woman working on her behalf with the efficiency and focus of a military operation. "Margaret, why are you doing all this for me? You barely know me." Margaret looked up from her phone and smiled. "Because my husband always said that we should take care of our own. Military families, active duty, retired, or transitioning are all part of the same family. When we have the opportunity to help each other, we should take it. But this is so much more than just helping. You're potentially changing my life." "Good," Margaret said firmly. "That's exactly what I'm hoping for." The wheels of Flight 447 touched down at Denver International Airport with barely a bump, a testament to Captain Reynolds' skill. As the plane taxied toward the gate, Sarah felt a mixture of nervousness and excitement that reminded her of the moments before a mission briefing. The difference was that this time, instead of planning an operation in hostile territory, she was preparing for meetings that could reshape her entire future. Margaret had spent the last hour of the flight coaching Sarah on interview strategies, company background, and key talking points. Her phone had buzzed constantly with responses to the messages she had sent, and each response seemed to bring more good news. "David Richardson confirmed that he can meet with you at 2 o'clock, Margaret said, scrolling through her latest messages. "I also set up a meeting tomorrow morning with Rebecca Walsh at TechSecure Solutions. They're a cybersecurity startup that's been looking for someone with exactly your background to lead their government contract division." Sarah shook her head in amazement. "I can't believe how quickly things are moving." "That's how it works when you have the right connections and the right skills," Margaret replied. "I also want you to meet with Dr. James Liu at the University of Colorado. They're starting a new veteran studies program and need someone with operational experience to help design the curriculum." "A university position? I never considered academia. It might not be your ultimate career path, but it could provide stability while you explore other options. Plus, the university has excellent health benefits and support services for veterans." As the plane reached the gate and passengers began preparing to disembark, Jennifer approached their row with a warm smile. "I hope you both enjoyed the flight," she said to Sarah and Margaret. "And, Sarah, Captain Reynolds asked me to give you this." Jennifer handed Sarah a handwritten note on airline stationery. Sarah unfolded it and read, "Sarah, thank you for your service and sacrifice. I hope this small gesture reminds you that your contributions are valued and remembered. The transition to civilian life is challenging, but don't ever forget that you have skills, experiences, and character that make you extraordinary. Wishing you fair winds and following seas." Captain Michael Reynolds, at the bottom of the note, he had written his email address and a message. "If you ever need a reference or just want to talk with someone who understands a transition, please don't hesitate to reach out." Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes as she read the note. "This is incredibly kind of him. He's a good man," Jennifer said. "He told me that he wishes more people understood what veterans go through when they leave the service. He said recognizing your service today was one of the best parts of his job." As they gathered their belongings and prepared to leave the aircraft, Margaret turned to Sarah with a serious expression. "Before we go our separate ways, I want you to understand something important. What happened today wasn't just about a nice captain or a chance meeting. This is what happens when you stop hiding who you are and what you've accomplished." Sarah looked confused. "What do you mean?" "You've been trying to blend in, to downplay your military service, to present yourself as just another job candidate. But your value doesn't come from how well you can pretend to be ordinary. It comes from the extraordinary things you've done and the unique perspective you bring." Margaret gestured towards Sarah's wrist, where the seal tattoo remained hidden under her sleeve. "Stop covering that up. Be proud of it. Let people see who you are." They walked together through the jet bridge and into the busy terminal. Sarah was struck by how different she felt from when she had boarded the plane in Chicago. The nervousness and uncertainty remained, but they were now mixed with confidence and genuine hope. "I need to collect my luggage and get to my hotel," Sarah said as they reached the main concourse. "I want to review everything you've shared with me before the meeting with Mr. Richardson." "Actually," Margaret said with a mischievous smile, "I took the liberty of upgrading your hotel reservation. You're now staying at the Brown Palace. It's where David typically meets with important potential hires. Being familiar with the environment will give you an advantage." Sarah started to protest. "Margaret, you've already done too much. I can't let you pay for—" "You're not letting me do anything," Margaret interrupted gently. "This is an investment in your future, and, more importantly, it's what my husband would have wanted me to do. He always said that when you have the resources to help a fellow service member, you do it without question." They made their way to the baggage claim area, where Margaret's phone rang. She answered it with the efficiency of someone used to managing multiple priorities simultaneously. "Yes, David, she's exceptional. Navy SEAL, 8 years, electronic warfare specialist, injured in action, medically discharged. No, she has no idea how valuable she is, which is exactly why you need to meet her." Sarah listened to Margaret advocating for her with someone she had never met, speaking about her qualifications and potential with complete confidence. It was surreal to hear her military experience described in terms of civilian value and opportunity. When Margaret ended the call, she turned to Sarah with a satisfied expression. "David is very interested. He's cleared his afternoon schedule to spend more time with you, and he wants you to meet with his technical team as well. What should I expect? Be yourself. Tell your story honestly. Don't try to minimize your accomplishments or apologize for your service. David values authenticity above everything else." They collected Sarah's luggage, a single bag that contained everything she owned of any importance, and walked toward the taxi stand. Margaret had arranged for a car service for both of them, despite Sarah's protests about the expense. "One more thing," Margaret said as they waited for their ride. "I want you to have this." She handed Sarah a small gift box wrapped in elegant paper. "Don't open it now. Wait until you get to your hotel room. But I think you'll find it useful for today's meetings." Sarah accepted the gift with gratitude and confusion. "Margaret, I don't understand why you're doing all this for me." "Because everyone deserves to have someone believe in them, especially people who have given so much to others," Margaret replied simply. "My husband used to say that the most valuable thing you can give another person is the confidence to see themselves clearly." Their car arrived, a black sedan driven by a professional chauffeur who greeted them politely and efficiently loaded Sarah's luggage. As they drove toward downtown Denver, Sarah watched the city landscape pass by and tried to process everything that had happened since boarding the plane. 6 hours ago, she had been a struggling veteran with limited prospects and a cramped economy seat. Now she had meetings scheduled with multiple potential employers, a luxury hotel room, and, most importantly, a mentor who seemed genuinely invested in her success. Margaret used the drive to share more insights about the Denver business community, key players in the security and technology sectors, and strategies for presenting her military experience in terms that civilian employers would understand and value. "Remember," Margaret said as they approached the Brown Palace Hotel, "your military service isn't something you need to apologize for or minimize. It's your greatest strength. Companies like Blackstone don't just need employees. They need leaders, problem solvers, and people who can perform under pressure. That's exactly what you are." The Brown Palace was everything Sarah had expected from a luxury hotel. Elegant lobby, attentive staff, and an atmosphere of quiet sophistication. Margaret helped her check in and made sure she was comfortable with the arrangements before preparing to leave for her own appointment with her daughter and new granddaughter. "I'll call you tonight to see how the meetings went," Margaret said as they stood in the ornate lobby. "And Sarah, remember that this is just the beginning. Whatever happens today, you now have a network of people who understand your value and want to help you succeed." After Margaret left, Sarah took the elevator to her room on the 8th floor. The accommodations were far beyond anything she could have afforded, spacious, beautifully appointed, with a stunning view of the Rocky Mountains. She set her luggage on the bed and sat in the comfortable chair by the window, looking out at the city where her new life might begin. She thought about Captain Reynolds, who had recognized her service and acted on that recognition. She thought about Margaret, who had transformed a chance encounter into a life-changing opportunity. She thought about all the people she had served with who were struggling with their own transitions, and she felt a responsibility to make the most of the chances she was being given. Sarah opened the gift box Margaret had given her. Inside was a beautiful silver bracelet with a small charm in the shape of the seal trident. Attached was a note that read, "Wear this proudly. Let people see who you are and what you've accomplished. Your service matters, and so do you." Sarah fastened the bracelet around her right wrist, positioning it so the trident charm was clearly visible next to her tattoo. For the first time since her discharge, she felt ready to embrace her identity as a veteran rather than hide from it. She spent the next hour preparing for her meeting with David Richardson, reviewing the notes Margaret had provided and practicing her responses to potential questions. But more importantly, she began to see herself through Margaret's eyes, not as a damaged veteran looking for charity, but as an accomplished professional with unique skills and valuable experience. At 1:30 p.m., Sarah walked through the hotel lobby toward her meeting with David Richardson. Her posture was straight, her head held high, and the sealed trident bracelet gleamed on her wrist. She was no longer hiding who she was or apologizing for her service. She was ready to show the world what a Navy SEAL could accomplish in civilian life. The transformation that had begun with a captain's kindness on Flight 447 was now complete. Sarah Mitchell was ready to claim her future. 3 months after that transformative flight to Denver, Sarah stood in the conference room of Blackstone Security Solutions, addressing a room full of government contractors and cybersecurity executives. As the newly appointed director of digital security operations, she was presenting her division's latest innovations in protecting critical infrastructure from cyber threats. The presentation was going exceptionally well. Her military experience provided unique insights into threat assessment and operational security that impressed even the most seasoned professionals in the room. The questions from the audience were thoughtful and engaged, and she could see genuine respect in their expressions as she answered with confidence and expertise. The key to effective cybersecurity, Sarah explained, advancing to her final slide, is thinking like an adversary while maintaining the discipline and precision of a defender. My background in electronic warfare taught me that you can't protect what you don't understand, and you can't defend against threats you can't anticipate. After the presentation, David Richardson approached her with a broad smile. The former Marine had become not just her employer, but a mentor and friend who understood both her potential and her struggles. "Outstanding work, as usual," he said. The team from the Department of Homeland Security was particularly impressed. "I think we're going to see some significant contract opportunities coming our way." "Thank you, sir. The team has been working incredibly hard on these proposals." "The team follows your lead, Sarah. Don't underestimate the impact of good leadership." As the room cleared and people returned to their various offices and appointments, Sarah gathered her materials and reflected on how dramatically her life had changed. The job at Blackstone had exceeded even Margaret's optimistic predictions. Not only had she been hired as the head of their new cybersecurity division, but she had been given the resources and authority to build something truly innovative. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Margaret. "Saw the news article about Blackstone's new DHS contract. Congratulations. Coffee tomorrow to celebrate." Sarah smiled and quickly typed back, "Absolutely. I have some exciting news to share with you too." The exciting news was an opportunity that had emerged from her success at Blackstone. The University of Colorado had approached her about developing a new degree program that would train veterans for cybersecurity careers. It would be a part-time position that would allow her to continue her work at Blackstone while helping other veterans make the transition to civilian life. Even more meaningful was a call she had received that morning from Jennifer, the flight attendant from Flight 447. Jennifer's nephew had successfully completed Navy basic training and was preparing for SEAL training, inspired in part by learning about Sarah's story. He wanted to thank her personally for showing him that his dreams were achievable. But the most significant development was something Sarah was still processing herself. Captain Reynolds had contacted her about an opportunity to work with airlines on aviation security protocols. Several major carriers were looking for experts who could help them identify and counter potential cyber threats to their navigation and communication systems. The irony wasn't lost on her that her career breakthrough had begun on an airplane, and now she might be returning to the aviation industry in a professional capacity. As Sarah walked through the office toward the elevator, she passed the wall of photographs that David had installed to honor the company's veteran employees. Her official photo hung among dozens of others, each accompanied by a brief description of their military service. Under her picture, the caption read, "Sarah Mitchell, Director of Digital Security Operations. U.S. Navy SEAL, 8 years of service. Specialized in electronic warfare and intelligence operations." She paused in front of the wall, as she often did, thinking about all the veterans who were still struggling to find their place in civilian life. Her success story was wonderful, but she knew that many others were facing the same challenges she had experienced without the benefit of the chance encounters and generous mentors who had changed her trajectory. That was why the university opportunity excited her so much. It would allow her to create systematic pathways for veterans to translate their skills into civilian careers, rather than hoping for lucky breaks and kind strangers. Sarah's phone rang as she reached the parking garage. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but something about it seemed familiar. "Hello, this is Sarah Mitchell." "Sarah, this is Captain Michael Reynolds. I hope you remember me from Flight 447 a few months ago." Sarah's face broke into a huge smile. "Of course I remember you, Captain. How are you?" "I'm doing very well, thank you. I've been following your career developments through Margaret Shun. I hope you don't mind that she's been keeping me updated on your progress." "Not at all. I owe both of you enormous debts of gratitude. Actually, that's why I'm calling. I have a proposition for you, and I think you're going to find it interesting." Captain Reynolds explained that several major airlines were collaborating on a new initiative to improve aviation cybersecurity. They needed someone with exactly Sarah's background to lead the technical development and implementation across multiple carriers. The position would involve significant travel, he continued, but it would also give you the opportunity to work with aviation professionals around the world and develop security protocols that could protect millions of passengers. Sarah felt a familiar thrill of excitement, the same feeling she had experienced when accepting challenging missions during her military service. "That sounds incredible, Captain, but I have significant commitments here in Denver." "I understand, and we wouldn't expect you to abandon the good work you're doing. This would be a consulting position that could work around your existing schedule. Think of it as a way to extend your impact beyond any single company or community." After ending the call with Captain Reynolds, Sarah sat in her car in the parking garage and marveled at the paths her life was taking. A year ago, she had been struggling to find any meaningful employment. Now she had multiple opportunities to use her skills in ways that could make a real difference in the world. She thought about the conversation she had planned with Margaret for the next day. In addition to celebrating the Blackstone contract, she wanted to discuss an idea that had been developing in her mind. A nonprofit organization specifically focused on helping female veterans transition to civilian careers. Her research had shown that women veterans faced unique challenges that weren't always addressed by traditional veteran support services. She wanted to create something that would provide mentorship, career development, and networking opportunities specifically tailored to their needs. Margaret's organization, Bridges to Tomorrow, could serve as a model, but Sarah envisioned something more specialized and focused. With her growing network of contacts in the Denver business community and her own success story as proof of concept, she believed she could create something truly impactful. As she drove home through the Denver traffic, Sarah passed the airport and saw a plane taking off into the clear Colorado sky. She wondered if Captain Reynolds was flying today, if he was making other chance encounters that might change someone's life, if he even realized the chain reaction he had set in motion with his simple act of kindness. Her phone buzzed with another text message, this time from Jennifer. My nephew starts SEAL training next month. He carries a picture of your quote about dreams being achievable. Thank you for inspiring him. Sarah pulled into her apartment complex and sat in the parking space for a moment, reading Jennifer's message again. The apartment was nothing fancy, a modest one-bedroom in a decent neighborhood, but it represented stability and independence that she had fought hard to achieve. Inside her apartment, the walls were decorated with certificates and photographs that told the story of her journey. Her military commendations hung alongside her recent professional achievements. A framed photograph from her graduation from SEAL training sat next to a picture of her first day at Blackstone. But the most meaningful item was the handwritten note from Captain Reynolds, framed and hanging near her desk. She read it often, especially on difficult days when the transition to civilian life still felt challenging. Sarah opened her laptop and began composing an email to Margaret, outlining her ideas for the new nonprofit organization. As she wrote, she thought about all the women veterans who were currently experiencing the same struggle she had faced, the sense of invisibility, the difficulty translating military skills to civilian opportunities, the loneliness of being disconnected from the military community. She wanted to create something that would ensure no woman veteran would have to face those challenges alone. Something that would provide the same kind of mentorship and support that Margaret had given her, but on a larger and more systematic scale. The email grew longer as her excitement about the project increased. She outlined potential partnerships with companies like Blackstone, educational institutions like the University of Colorado, and established organizations like Margaret's Bridges to Tomorrow. She described her vision of regional chapters that could provide local support and networking opportunities. She explained her ideas for mentorship programs that would pair successful female veterans in civilian careers with those who were just beginning their transitions. Most importantly, she wrote about the philosophy that would guide the organization, the belief that military service wasn't something women veterans needed to minimize or apologize for, but something they should embrace as their greatest professional asset. As she finished the email and prepared to send it, Sarah looked at the SEAL Trident bracelet on her wrist, the one Margaret had given her with the instruction to wear it proudly. She had indeed worn it proudly every day since, and she had seen how it opened doors and started conversations that led to opportunities. Tomorrow, she would meet with Margaret to discuss these ideas and begin the process of turning her vision into reality. She would also speak with David Richardson about Blackstone's potential involvement and support. But tonight, she simply sat in her apartment and allowed herself to feel grateful for the journey that had brought her here. From a cramped economy seat on Flight 447 to the director's office at one of Denver's most respected security firms, from hiding her military service to proudly advocating for veteran opportunities. The transformation had begun with a captain who noticed her tattoo and decided to act on his appreciation for her service. It had continued with a fellow passenger who saw potential where Sarah had seen only obstacles. And it had flourished through her own determination to stop hiding who she was and start embracing what she had accomplished. As Sarah prepared for bed that night, she thought about the veterans who were probably sitting on airplanes at that very moment, traveling to job interviews and new opportunities, facing uncertain futures and wondering if their service mattered to anyone. She hoped that somewhere there was another Captain Reynolds noticing their sacrifices and acting on his gratitude. She hoped that somewhere there was another Margaret Shun ready to open doors and provide mentorship. But she also knew that she could be that person for others. She could be the one who noticed, who cared, who acted on her appreciation for service and sacrifice. She could be the one who helped other veterans see their true value and potential. The flight that had changed her life was just the beginning. The real work, The work of paying forward the kindness and opportunities she had received was just getting started. Sarah smiled as she turned off the lights and settled in for sleep. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to make a difference. She couldn't wait to see where the journey would take her next.